Okay, so I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound absolutely crazy, but I need you to hear me out, right? 3 years ago, I was abducted by aliens. And I know, you're probably thinking, here we go, another crazy person claiming they were taken by little green men. But here's the thing, I was the biggest skeptic you'd ever meet. Like, oh my God, I was that person, you know. So my name is Sarah, and I'm 28, and I work as a graphic designer in Colorado. But before I tell you about what happened that night, I need to give you some backstory because, this whole experience makes so much more sense when you understand where I came from. You know what I mean? I've always been what you'd call a left brain person, since I was little. My mom used to tell this story about how when I was around 5 or 6, my grandmother would come over and she was super into astral projection and remote viewing and all that metaphysical stuff, right? And she would try to teach me these consciousness expansion techniques, and I would literally roll my eyes. At 6 years old, can you imagine, who does that? And my grandmother, she was always like, Sarah has such a bright aura. She just needs to open her third eye. And I would be like, Grandma, that's not real. Show me the science. What 6-year-old says that, right? But that was me, always asking for proof, always needing evidence for everything. So I grew up in this really, how do I explain this? My family was split, you know? My mom was kind of in the middle, but my dad was super logical, engineer type, and my grandmother was all about the galactic consciousness and dimensional shifting and all these concepts that I couldn't wrap my head around. And I definitely took after my dad's side, hardcore. In school, I was the kid correcting teachers when they'd mention anything that wasn't scientifically proven. I remember in 8th grade, our teacher mentioned something about psychic phenomena, and I literally raised my hand and was like, where's your peer-reviewed research? I was that kid. Super obnoxious about it too. And then high school. Oh my God. High school was when I really went full skeptic mode. This was the early 2000s, right? And everyone was getting into these spiritual awakening trends, and I was having none of it. I would debate anyone who mentioned anything about energy healing or vibrational frequencies or Akashic records or whatever. I was like the unofficial debunker of my entire school. I went to university, and this is important because it shaped who I became. I went to university for graphic design, but I also took a bunch of psychology classes because I wanted to understand why people believed in what I thought was nonsense, you know. I was fascinated by the psychology of belief systems. I wrote papers on confirmation bias and how people convince themselves that paranormal experiences are real when they're I thought they were just neurological glitches or whatever. And that's how I ended up becoming a graphic designer, because I loved the logical side of visual communication, the science behind color theory and composition and all that. I was good at it because everything I did was based on research and data and proven psychological principles. No woo-woo, no intuition, just hard science applied to visual design. So when I tell you I was a skeptic, I was a skeptic, right? Capital S, skeptic. I was that person who would go to psychic readings just to prove they were fake. I was that person who would research every supernatural claim and find the rational explanation. Looking back, I was probably pretty insufferable about it. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is why I'm telling you my whole backstory, because what I'm about to share with you changed how I see my place in reality. And I'm telling you this because I know there are people out there who've had similar experiences, and they're probably thinking they're going crazy. And you're not. You're not crazy. Trust me on that. Now, before I dive into what happened to me that night, and oh my God, what a night it was, I want to give you 3 things that this story is going to reveal to you. First, why even the most skeptical people can have consciousness experiences that completely change their worldview. Second, what actually happens during an extraterrestrial contact experience. And I mean the real details that no one talks about. The stuff about a sense of crossing boundaries I couldn't explain, and nonverbal impressions that surfaced at once, and a subjective sense of resonance. And third, how this experience can actually activate dormant psychic abilities and transform your entire understanding of a larger context beyond our world. But first, let me share what changed for me afterward and why it felt significant. After what happened to me, my creativity as a graphic designer increased noticeably, it felt like an upgrade to how I process ideas and perception. I started seeing patterns and connections that I'd never noticed before. I started understanding color frequencies and sacred geometry in ways that, I can't even explain it. My work went from average to extraordinary, almost overnight, like literally overnight. I started getting clients I never thought I could land, projects that were way beyond what I thought I was capable of. And the weird thing is, ideas about design and visual communication would occur to me unexpectedly that I had never learned anywhere. Like, new ideas began to surface rapidly about how certain color combinations might influence mood and focus, or how specific geometric patterns could induce meditative states. And I'm telling you, I had never studied any of this metaphysical design theory before. Never. It was like I was channeling information from somewhere else. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you about the camping trip, because that's where everything changed. Everything. This whole thing started about 3 years ago when I went on what was supposed to be a relaxing camping trip with my college roommate Jessica. We'd been planning this trip for months, just wanting to get away from the city, disconnect from our phones, do some digital detoxing, and just enjoy nature for a long weekend. We picked this really remote spot in Rocky Mountain National Park, like far from any trails or campsites, where we could have complete solitude under the stars. And Jessica, she'd always been more open to what she called weird stuff than I was. She wasn't like full-on spiritual or anything, but she would say things like, she'd look up at the night sky and be like, "Sarah, doesn't this make you wonder about interdimensional beings or galactic federations or something?" And I would just laugh and tell her she'd been watching too much sci-fi. That was me, right? Super skeptical about everything spiritual or extraterrestrial. But Jessica, she kept pointing out how clear the night sky was. How you could see thousands of stars that were invisible from the city. Doesn't it make you wonder what else is out there? Like, what if we're not alone? What if there are beings with advanced consciousness technologies just watching us right now? She'd ask, and I'd just laugh and tell her she'd been reading too many New Age books or whatever. The first 2 days were perfect. Like, absolutely perfect. We hiked during the day, cooked simple meals over our camp stove, spent the evenings talking by the fire about everything and nothing. It was exactly what we needed. Just peace, quiet, and this incredible connection with nature that you can't get in the city. And I remember feeling so grounded, so connected to the earth, which was weird for me because I don't usually think in those terms, But on our third night, everything changed. Everything, and I mean everything. Now, I want you to really pay attention to this part because what I'm about to describe follows a pattern that thousands of other experiencers have reported, and most of them were skeptics just like me. It usually starts with this feeling that something's not right, this shift in the vibrational frequency of your environment, We'd gone to bed around 10 p.m., exhausted from a long day of hiking. Our tent was small but comfortable, and I remember feeling so grateful for the cool mountain air and the complete silence that surrounded us. No traffic, no neighbors, no city noise, just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees and this distant sound of a stream. It was peaceful, like really peaceful in a way that I hadn't experienced since I was a kid. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night with this really strange feeling that something was wrong. That feeling you get sometimes when you wake up and you're not sure why? Like some part of your brain, maybe your higher consciousness or your psychic awareness, detected a threat that your logical mind hadn't registered yet. That's exactly what this was like, except amplified by like 1,000 times. It was intense. Really intense. And here's where the first major sign appears, the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No wind, no stream, no insects, nothing. It was like someone had just turned off all the sound in the world. If you've ever experienced this kind of dimensional shifting, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not natural silence. It's like an unusual silence that I couldn't account for, Now here's something really important that most people don't understand about extraterrestrial contact experiences. The beings, and I'm going to call them that because aliens sounds so, so Hollywood. It felt as if the environment around us shifted in ways I couldn't explain. It felt like pockets of altered consciousness where normal physics didn't seem to apply. And that's what was happening here. The second thing I noticed was this light, this soft, blue-white light filtering through the walls of our tent. And my first thought, because I'm still thinking like a skeptic at this point, my first thought was that maybe it was dawn and the sun was coming up. But when I checked my watch, it was only 2:47 a.m. Way too early for sunrise, right? Then I thought maybe Jessica had gotten up and turned on a lantern outside, but when I looked over, she was still in her sleeping bag, completely motionless. And that's when I realized she wasn't just sleeping. She was too still, too quiet. Jessica was always a restless sleeper, always tossing and turning, but now she looked almost like suspended animation, like she was frozen in some kind of a state that seemed unnaturally still. It was weird. Really, really weird. I tried to wake her up, shaking her shoulder and whispering her name, but she didn't respond at all. Not even a little bit. It was like she was in some kind of deep meditative trance or consciousness suspension. That's when I started to panic, because this wasn't normal. None of this was normal, and my logical mind was trying to find rational explanations, but there weren't any. Now, what I'm about to tell you next is where most people stop believing the story. But I need you to stick with me here because this is where it gets really important, where everything I thought I knew about reality it all fell apart, you know what I mean? I unzipped the tent flap and looked outside, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The light wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from above, way above. There was this massive object hovering maybe 100 feet over our campsite, completely silent, emanating this soft blue-white glow that seemed to pulse gently like a heartbeat. Like a cosmic heartbeat, if that makes any sense. I want to be clear about something here, okay? I'm not the type of person who sees things that aren't there. I don't have a history of hallucinations or mental illness. I wasn't drinking or taking any kind of medication. What I saw was as real as the ground beneath my feet. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. It's how I remember it. The object was huge, maybe the size of a football field, with this smooth metallic surface that seemed to shift and change as I looked at it. It wasn't quite round and it wasn't quite triangular. The shape seemed almost fluid, like it was constantly morphing into something slightly different, like it was existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and I was only seeing one cross-section of it. And it was absolutely silent. No humming, no engine noise, nothing. Just this presence, this incredible, overwhelming presence. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, just staring up at this thing, trying to process what I was seeing. Part of my brain was screaming at me to run, to grab Jessica and get as far away as possible. But another part of me was completely fascinated, unable to look away. It was beautiful in this terrifying way, like looking at something that was so far beyond human technology that it might as well have been magic. And here's where the experience takes a turn that changes everything. That's when I noticed that I couldn't move, and I mean, I couldn't move. It started gradually. First, I realized I couldn't turn my head. Then, I couldn't move my arms. Within seconds, my entire body was paralyzed, but I was still completely conscious and aware of everything that was happening around me. I could see, I could hear, I could think clearly, but I couldn't move a single muscle. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced. I felt overwhelming fear. Now, here's something that most people don't understand about this kind of consciousness paralysis. It's not just physical. They're also affecting your astral body, your energy field, your entire vibrational matrix. It's like they're temporarily disconnecting your soul from your physical form so they can work with both separately. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what was happening. The light from the object began to intensify, and I felt this strange tingling sensation all over my body, like mild electricity running through my skin. But it wasn't just electricity, it was like my entire cellular structure was being scanned, like every molecule in my body was being analyzed by some kind of a process I couldn't interpret with my usual frame of reference. Then slowly, I began to rise off the ground. I want you to really think about that for a second, okay? I felt myself lifted by a force I couldn't identify, completely paralyzed, fully conscious, staring up at this massive interdimensional craft. The terror I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. It wasn't just fear of the unknown, it was the absolute helplessness of being completely at the mercy of something that was so far beyond my understanding that I couldn't even begin to comprehend what was happening to me. But here's the thing, and this is really important, underneath the terror, there was also this weird sense of recognition, like some part of my consciousness, maybe my higher self or my soul memory, recognized what was happening. Like this wasn't the first time, even though I had no conscious memory of any previous experiences. As I floated upward, I could see our campsite getting smaller below me. I could see Jessica, still motionless in the tent, and our little fire pit with the cold ashes from our evening campfire. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, except for the fact that I felt myself lifted by a force I couldn't identify. Like, that's not a sentence I ever thought I'd say in my life, you know? Like, what is my life right now? The next thing I remember, I was inside the craft, lying on what felt like this cold, smooth table. The paralysis had worn off, but when I tried to sit up or move around, I found that I simply couldn't. Not because I was physically restrained, but because my body just wouldn't respond to my brain's commands. It was like my consciousness had been separated from my physical form. Really weird sensation. Like being in a lucid dream but knowing you're not dreaming. The room I was in was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls, ceiling, and floor all seemed to be made of the same smooth, white material that gave off this soft, pulsing glow. There were no visible seams or joints anywhere, like the entire room had been grown or manifested rather than constructed. The air had this strange quality to it, almost thick, with a faint metallic taste. I remember thinking, like, this did not feel like typical air. It seemed different to me. And then I saw them. Oh my God. Then I saw them. 3 beings approached the table where I was lying, and they looked unlike any people I've seen. They were tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with these elongated limbs and torsos. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with this slight blue tint that seemed to shift and shimmer like it was alive. Their heads were larger than human heads, oval-shaped, with these enormous dark eyes that seemed to take up most of their faces. They had small noses, just tiny slits really, and mouths that were barely visible. The strangest thing about them, though, was how they moved. They didn't walk like humans do. They seemed to glide across the floor, their movements fluid and graceful, like they were underwater or existing in a lower gravity environment. And they communicated without speaking, at least not in any way that I could hear with my physical ears, but somehow I could sense their thoughts. Their intentions, like they were broadcasting directly into my consciousness using some kind of nonverbal, concept-based communication. Now, here's something really important that most people don't understand about extraterrestrial communication. It's not like human telepathy, if that even exists. It's like they're downloading information directly into your awareness. The communication wasn't in words exactly. It was more like concepts and images and entire knowledge packages appearing in my awareness. Like someone was uploading files directly into my brain's hard drive. And here's the thing that really surprised me. They weren't hostile. Like, at all. I realized they were curious. Genuinely curious. They were studying me the same way a scientist might study a new species of butterfly under a microscope. Not cruel, just clinically interested. Like, they wanted to understand what I was, how my consciousness operated, how my energy field interfaced with my physical body. One of them approached with what looked like this small device, about the size of a smartphone but completely smooth and featureless. As it held the device near my head, I felt this strange scanning sensation, like gentle waves of energy washing over my brain. It wasn't painful, just very unusual, like nothing I'd ever felt before. It was like they were reading not just my mind, but my entire consciousness history, all my memories, all my thoughts, all my dreams. Like they were bringing memories and feelings to mind all at once. Through that weird, nonverbal, impression-based exchange, I got the impression that they were trying to understand human consciousness, human emotions, human memory structures. They seemed particularly interested in my creativity, my work as a graphic designer, the way my mind processed visual information and turned abstract concepts into concrete images. It was like they were fascinated by the creative process, by how human imagination works. But they were also interested in something else. Something deeper. They kept scanning what felt like my soul frequency, my vibrational signature, my spiritual DNA, if that makes any sense. Like they were looking for something specific, some kind of marker or activation code in my consciousness. The whole examination, if that's what it was, lasted maybe an hour. They took what I can only describe as an assessment that, to me, seemed to involve body and awareness, not just my physical body, but what I interpreted as layers of perception and memory. They seemed fascinated by human physiology, by the way our consciousness integrates with our biological systems, by how we process and store information across multiple levels of awareness. But here's the thing that really surprised me. They were gentle, clinical, yes, and completely otherworldly, but not cruel or malicious. They treated me with what I can only describe as respectful curiosity. Like researchers studying a species they wanted to understand without harming. That really changed my perception of what was happening, you know? Like, maybe this wasn't an abduction. Maybe this was more like a consultation. And then something incredible happened. At one point, one of them touched my forehead with what I think was its hand, though it had these long, thin fingers that felt more like energy than physical matter. The moment it made contact, I was flooded with images and sensations that definitely weren't from my own mind. Like, definitely not from my own mind. I saw glimpses of other worlds, other civilizations, these vast networks of intelligent species scattered across not just the galaxy, but across multiple dimensions, multiple realities. I saw Earth from space, not as a photograph, but as this living, breathing organism teeming with an incredible diversity of consciousness. And I understood, in that moment, that we weren't alone in the universe. Not even close. Like, not even in the same ballpark of alone. There were thousands, maybe millions of intelligent species out there at various stages of consciousness evolution, all connected in ways that we couldn't even begin to imagine. Humanity was just one small part of this unimaginably vast, larger context beyond our world. It was profound. Like, profound doesn't even begin to describe it. I also saw, and this is where it gets really interesting, I saw that it felt as if Earth were a place of learning and change. Like, we're part of this massive experiment in free will and spiritual evolution. And these beings, it felt like structured observation and study. Does that make sense? The experience felt overwhelming, beautiful, and frightening. It changed how I see my place in reality, our place in the universe, and what might be possible. It was like being shown that the world you thought was real was actually just this tiny corner of something infinitely larger and more complex. Like, infinitely larger. When the examination was over, they communicated to me that they were done, that they would return me to where they found me. But before they did, one of them shared what I can only describe as a gift, a consciousness gift. Through that nonverbal, impression-based exchange, they showed me images of Earth's future, potential futures anyway, where humanity had learned to live in harmony with the planet and with each other, where we'd developed these technologies that seemed impossible by today's standards, technologies that allowed us to heal environmental damage, to improve living conditions and health, to explore not just the stars but other dimensions, other realities, free energy systems, visions of new approaches to well-being, visions of travel beyond our current understanding. All of it was possible, they showed me. All of it. They showed me that this future was possible, but not guaranteed. It depended on choices that we as a species would make in the coming decades. In the coming years, actually. And they couldn't interfere directly. Apparently, it seemed there were limits to direct involvement. But they could observe, and occasionally, they could share knowledge with individuals who might be able to use it to help humanity evolve in a positive direction. That was really profound, you know, like, really profound. The idea that we have this incredible potential, but we have to choose it. We have to actively choose to evolve our consciousness, to raise our vibrational frequency, to become worthy of joining this a larger context beyond our world. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Like, just over. I found myself back at our campsite, lying on the ground next to our tent, staring up at a normal, star-filled sky. The massive craft was gone. The blue-white light was gone. Even that strange, thick silence was gone. I could hear insects chirping, wind in the trees, the distant sound of the stream. Everything was back to normal, or what I used to think was normal, except for Jessica. She was still in that deep, trance-like sleep, completely unresponsive. I managed to wake her up after about 10 minutes of shaking and calling her name, and when she finally came to, she had no memory of anything unusual happening. As far as she knew, she'd just had a really good night's sleep. She didn't remember the light, the silence, the craft, nothing. It was like her memory had been selectively edited. I checked my watch. It was 4:23 a.m. I'd been gone for about an hour and a half, though it had felt much longer while I was on the craft. Jessica's watch showed the same time, confirming that whatever had happened to me, she hadn't experienced any missing time. It was just me. Just my experience. I didn't tell her what had happened. How could I? I mean, how do you explain to someone that you were just contacted by interdimensional beings, examined by consciousness researchers from another reality, and shown visions of humanity's potential future? It sounds crazy even to me, and I lived through it, you know? I lived through it. But here's where the real transformation began. And this is why I'm sharing this story with you, because what happened next proves that this experience was real and had lasting effects that I couldn't have imagined or made up or hallucinated or whatever. We packed up and left that morning, cutting our trip short by a day. I told Jessica I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't entirely a lie. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, emotionally and mentally drained from the most intense consciousness experience of my life. I needed to process what had happened. I needed to integrate these new recurring imagery and insights into my awareness. The drive home was quiet. I kept replaying everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself that it had been some kind of vivid dream or astral projection or lucid hallucination. But I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't because of the changes that were already starting to happen in my awareness, in my perception, in my consciousness. It was too detailed, too consistent, too transformative to be anything other than a genuine interdimensional contact experience. And there were physical effects that I couldn't explain away, physical changes that proved something profound had happened to me. For one thing, I had what looked like this small, perfectly circular mark on my forehead, right where one of the beings had touched me. It wasn't painful, just this faint geometric pattern about the size of a dime. Jessica noticed it on the drive home and asked if I'd hit my head on a branch or something, but I just shrugged and said I didn't remember doing it. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. More significantly, I found that my perception had changed in ways that I couldn't ignore. Colors seemed more vivid, patterns more complex, geometric relationships more meaningful. As a graphic designer, I work with visual elements every day, and suddenly I was seeing connections and possibilities that I'd never noticed before. Sacred geometry started making sense to me. Color theory took on whole new dimensions. My creativity had been amplified somehow, like someone had upgraded the operating system of my consciousness. In the weeks that followed, I started having these dreams that felt more like memories, visions of other worlds, other species, technologies, and concepts that were completely beyond current human understanding. Some of these dreams were so vivid and detailed that I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I could remember, drawing the symbols and diagrams that kept appearing in my consciousness. And looking back at those journal entries now, I can see ideas and designs that were years ahead of what I was capable of creating before the experience. Mandala patterns that incorporated multidimensional mathematics, color combinations that seemed to activate certain colors associated with calm or focus, typography that somehow conveyed meaning beyond the literal words. It was like I'd been given access to an entirely different design vocabulary, a new design vocabulary I hadn't used before, one I'd never studied anywhere. I also started thinking differently about humanity's future, about the environmental and social challenges we're facing. The visions the beings had shown me kept coming back, images of what Earth could become if we made different choices. I started volunteering for environmental organizations, changing my lifestyle to be more sustainable, talking to friends and family about the importance of raising our collective consciousness and taking better care of our planet. But here's the weird thing. I also started developing what I can only describe as psychic abilities, like actual intuitive impressions that sometimes seem to align with later events. I would know things about people that I had no way of knowing. I could sense energy fields and aura colors. I started having precognitive dreams that would come true within days or weeks. It was like the contact experience had activated dormant parts of my consciousness, unlocked psychic potentials that had been sleeping in my DNA. I know how this sounds, okay? I know exactly how this sounds. I know most people would write me off as delusional or attention-seeking or having some kind of spiritual psychosis. For the longest time, I kept the whole experience to myself, not telling anyone, not even my closest friends or family. I was afraid they'd think I was losing my mind, you know, and honestly, sometimes I wondered if I was. But as months turned into years, I started researching other people's experiences, reading accounts of extraterrestrial contact, consciousness expansion, spiritual awakening, and I discovered that my experience, while unique in its details, followed patterns that thousands of other experiencers have reported. The paralysis, the missing time, the consciousness examination, the telepathic communication, the psychic activation, the profound impact on the person's worldview afterward. I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't alone at all. I also learned that many contactees report similar after effects: enhanced creativity, increased environmental awareness, activated psychic abilities, a sense of connection to galactic consciousness, and recurring imagery and insights of other worlds and civilizations. It gave me some comfort, knowing that I wasn't alone, that other people had gone through similar consciousness expansions and came out the other side as functional, integrated human beings with expanded awareness. About a year after the experience, I decided to see this therapist who specialized in what they call anomalous experiences. I didn't tell her specifically about the contact at first, just that I'd had a transformative spiritual experience that had changed my perspective on life and reality. She was professional and non-judgmental, helping me process the emotional impact of what I'd been through without necessarily focusing on whether or not it had really happened in consensus reality. Eventually, I did tell her the whole story, and to her credit, she didn't dismiss it or suggest that I was delusional. Instead, she helped me understand that regardless of the objective reality of what I'd experienced, the psychological and spiritual impact was very real and needed to be integrated. That was really helpful, you know? Really helpful. That therapeutic process helped me integrate the experience into my life in a healthier way. I learned to see it not as something that had happened to me, but as something that had awakened in me, activating potentials that were already there, expanding my consciousness in ways that were ultimately beneficial for my spiritual evolution. Now, 3 years later, I've reached a point where I'm comfortable sharing my story, not because I need people to believe me. I don't need that validation anymore, but because I think there are others out there who've had similar consciousness experiences and feel isolated and confused about what happened to them. And if you're one of those people, I want you to know that you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not delusional. Whatever you experienced, whatever you saw or felt or remembered or downloaded, your experience is valid. You don't have to prove it to anyone else. You don't have to convince skeptics or debunkers or closed-minded people who aren't ready to expand their understanding of reality. You just have to integrate it into your life in whatever way feels authentic and empowering for you. You know, I still don't have all the answers. I don't know why I was chosen for that experience, if I was chosen at all, or if I somehow attracted it through my own consciousness frequency. I don't know if those beings are still monitoring humanity, still conducting consciousness research, still occasionally sharing knowledge with selected individuals who are ready to receive it and use it responsibly. I don't know if we'll ever have official contact with a larger context beyond our world, or if that contact is already happening in ways that most of humanity isn't aware of yet. But what I do know is that the experience changed me in ways that have been largely positive, transformative, evolutionary. I'm more creative, more environmentally conscious, more aware of humanity's potential for both destruction and transcendence. I feel connected to something larger than myself, part of this vast, larger context beyond our world that extends far beyond our small planet. I believe we may not be alone, that there may be observers with positive intent who want to see us evolve and thrive and eventually join the cosmic community as mature, responsible galactic citizens. I also know that I'm not afraid anymore. Not of the unknown, not of the possibility that we're being observed or studied or guided by beings from other dimensions. If anything, I find it comforting to imagine we may not be alone, and that advanced forms of consciousness could exist, some perhaps willing to help us navigate challenges and grow our awareness. The mark on my forehead faded after about 6 months, but the changes to my perception and creativity and psychic abilities have remained. I've built a successful career partly on ideas and insights that I can trace back to those recurring imagery and insights from that night in the mountains. I've also become an advocate for environmental protection and consciousness evolution, motivated by those visions of Earth's potential future that they shared with me. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point, you know? If the beings who contacted me that night were less interested in studying human biology and more interested in activating human consciousness, awakening dormant potentials, seeding new ideas and perspectives that could help accelerate our species' spiritual evolution. Maybe they've done the same thing with thousands of other people, creating this network of awakened individuals who carry their messages forward without even fully realizing they're doing it. I may never know for sure, but I'm grateful for the experience. Strange and terrifying and beautiful as it was, it opened my mind to possibilities I never would have considered before. It activated abilities I never knew I had. It gave me a sense of purpose and connection that has enriched my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. And if there are others out there, other consciousness researchers from other dimensions watching us, studying us, maybe even trying to help us evolve, I say welcome. We could use all the guidance we can get, right? We could use all the consciousness expansion support available. The universe is vast and full of wonders and intelligences that we're only beginning to understand. My experience was just one tiny glimpse into that vastness, but it was enough to change how I see reality and our place in a larger context. 3 years later, I'm still processing, still learning, still growing, still receiving occasional recurring imagery and insights from that initial contact experience, and I suspect I will be for the rest of my life. But that's okay. Some consciousness expansions are so profound that they keep revealing new layers of meaning and understanding as we mature and evolve spiritually. And if you've had your own contact experience, your own impossible awakening, your own consciousness activation, don't let anyone tell you it wasn't real. Trust your own perception, your own memory, your own inner knowing. The universe is much stranger and more wonderful and more interconnected than most people realize. I'm grateful to have been given that glimpse behind the veil, even if I can't fully explain or prove what I experienced there. This is my story, and I'm sharing it not to convince anyone of anything, but simply to add my voice to those who've had similar consciousness expansions and awakenings. We're part of something larger than ourselves, part of this vast, a larger context beyond our world that extends far beyond our small planet. And maybe, just maybe, we're being given the tools and inspiration and consciousness upgrades we need to become worthy members of that cosmic civilization. That hope keeps me moving forward, 3 years after the most transformative night of my life. And if my story resonates with you, if it activates something in you that makes you question what you thought you knew about reality and consciousness and our place in the universe, then maybe that's exactly what it was supposed to do. Because it feels like an invitation to expand awareness, develop our potential, and recognize a larger context than we once imagined. And maybe, just maybe, experiences like mine are part of that awakening process, part of humanity's graduation into galactic citizenship. The night ended, the questions stayed, and they still move me forward.